tragedy of the last year, from the George Floyd murder to all of the discussions and revamping of different things of really trying to uh, give notice to a criminal justice system that is in discussion of reforming and reimagining. And now we're here with uh, uh, a year, 11 months after the murder, having a verdict. I think, most everyone understands that it is really focused on accountability and not necessarily justice for the action, because we still have loss of life. And I start off with that discussion, but then I also, as I took over in the midst of um, kind of the initial discussions of revamping and reimagining policing, we have obviously are over the next several weeks could find ourselves preparing for a lot of different events. We know that May Day is always a day of demonstrations, and we want to make sure that we help facilitate those demonstrations. Usually, there is one of immigration, and that is the next, one of the another civil rights topic of our day, that also has to be in the greater discussion of civil rights. And so that is typically one of the events. We will have multiple events throughout that day that we're preparing for and planning for. And then we also will probably have something in regards to the anniversary of the George Floyd protests and murder that will occur around end of May. And then after that, there will be a sentencing for Derek Chauvin. And so that is 8 weeks out from yesterday. And so these are all events that we are planning and preparing to help facilitate, this First Amendment dialogue. And, as we move forward, we are really just trying to, you know, uh, focus on how we can, be part of that facilitated change. I, over the last several months, have come into this role of really trying to make sure that our department is really striving for excellence. In the last several months, I've had to make a number of terminations to hold people accountable for those actions, and I've had I know just personally it's not something I strive for, but I've had the most terminations that most of the chiefs in our career or in their career had just in a very short period of time, because there's very simple things. You don't lie and you're not racist. I think that that's a very easy aspect of it, but I've had to make 8 terminations just for those things. And I find myself making sure that we hold ourselves to the highest level of standards, because really what we're striving is for is excellence in everything that we do. And I know that because we hire from the human race, we will have mishaps, but that is where the accountability partners, the accountability system really takes hold, and it allows us to be effective in what we do, and making sure we hold people accountable, and also allowing the good officers to do the great work that is done out in the streets. And you have a wonderful officer joining you with Mark Mullins on this committee, and others. But I think that is what my commitment is to the Community Police Commission and all of our accountability partners. But I know later on, where I've sent a message over to Chief Granite, probably being able to give a little bit more of an update, general update to just different things that how we're responding to at the different events. But just wanted to at least kind of come in at the very beginning of the Community Police Commission, and just also say some words that I think are all on our hearts and all on our shoulders too. So.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. We'll actually now go on to our agenda, and the first item is to take attendance. I do want to point out that we do have 2 new commissioners that were confirmed this week. We will be having time during the co-chair updates for them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit more. But for right now, I will read the attendance. Asha Mohammed, Patricia Hunter,
Present.
LaRon Baker,
Present.
Suzette Dickerson,
Present.
Douglas Wagner,
Here.
Prachi Dave,
Present.
Aaron Goodman is here, Navin Pinto,
Present.
Austin Field,
Present.
Harriet Walden,
Present.
Catherine Siebel,
Present.
Joseph Saya. I saw Joseph. Joseph is here for the record. Esther Lucero,
Here.
LaJaya Washington, Mark Mullins,
Present.
Alina Santillan,
Here. And also, just so you know, it's LaJaya.
LaJaya, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Scott Bachler's on leave. Colleen Echohawk, Tasha Johnson, Tasha, I see you on here. Okay, let's unmute. And Erica Newman,
Present.
thank you. All right, so now we will move to,
Sorry, Aaron, I'm present too. My bad. Joseph.
I saw you. Thank you, Joseph. We did count you. So now we need to review the agenda. I realize that many of you got the agenda, the revised agenda this morning, because we did want to make some additions due to yesterday's events. But I would, at this point, entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Aaron, can I do a point of order? Can I add on, request to add on to the agenda for a brief executive session?
That's a question I actually have to turn over to Gary Smith. Can we add executive session at the last minute?
Yes, you could add an executive session for the last minute. I'm not sure about what the topic is. And
Yeah,
of
we
course,
would need to discuss that. I think what I need to do is probably have a second to connect with you, Suzette, to understand with Gary, so we can understand what the purpose is and make sure that it meets the definition for executive session.
It might actually be helpful to, Suzette, if you can give a high level description of what you're wanting to talk about without divulging any
Sure.
confidential
Sure.
issues.
It's to address some internal issues. Internal process issues.
Internal to the CPC?
Correct.
Okay, then I'm going to suggest that we table that, have a discussion, and then potentially put it on for the next meeting, unless you feel like there's an urgent.
Oh, it needs to be addressed before that, because there's other things that are going to be happening that this needs to be addressed prior to that next meeting.
Okay.
So we still need to make sure that, just internal processes, unless it involves with a staff person, would not rise to the level of executive session. So is there?
I'm trying to, Erin, and it does.
Okay.
I'm trying to be cognizant of everything and not put business out there. So
Okay.
it does.
All right. So my understanding is that there's an item that would relate to staffing that we would need to put an executive session on. We have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the meeting. So we can add an executive session there. And so with that addition,
could I just add, Aaron?
Gary.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a bit more information. And I could just say generally an executive session would be justified to discuss the performance of a public official or a public employee, or a complaint against the public official or employee, but just internal process doesn't give me enough information to analyze the request.
And it would, Gary, just to make that clear, it would be a complaint.
Okay, a discussion about a complaint
Correct.
related to, okay, that would be a justification for an executive session. The discussion should be centered on that and not go beyond that.
Correct.
Okay, so we will put that in at the end of the meeting. Just as a point of order, it would be helpful in the future to get these before we're in open session so that we can, make sure that we do all the necessary vetting with our attorneys before going forward. But with the addition of executive session for the last part of the agenda, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
And a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, everyone. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any, any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion to approve the agenda with the addition of executive session has passed. Now we will move to the draft minutes. Do we have, these are the minutes from March 17th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for March 17th?
I think I have a correction to the minutes.
Okay.
And it says that Reverend Aaron Williams was present. I don't believe he was.
No, he was not. Let me, do you see any other errors? That type of error, we can still approve the minutes with that. It's not a substantive. So we will make sure to remove that from the minutes. Okay, any motion or other further adjustments to the minutes? Okay, and we will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that the minutes be approved.
Thank you, Reverend Chair. Any seconds?
I'll second it.
All in favor of approving the 3:17 minutes as amended?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. I would now like to turn it over to our Sergeant at Arms, Esther Lucero.
Everyone, now it's time for public comment. Jesse, I haven't received any notice that folks have signed up for public comment, but just a reminder, we have 2 minutes for each person. So if there's anybody who'd like to provide public comment at this time, please let us know.
We just got a request from Dr. Howard Gale.
Okay, great. Okay, go ahead, Howard. You've got 2 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Gill. Any other further comments, public comments? Okay, I'll hand it back to the. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Laron?
I'm sorry. I had to step away for a second. Can you tell me what?
We just completed public comment, and so I was handing it back to you all.
Okay, great. So I think where we are right now, sorry, we've had a number of changes in the agenda. Today and this morning has been a difficult morning, as last night was, I think, for all of us. So we wanted to take a minute today for us to really have an opportunity to discuss the Chauvin verdict and the impact that it has had on all of us. I know I'm getting a lot of feedback. So if people can mute themselves if they're not talking, that would be helpful. Great, thank you. The verdict last night was one that was welcome, but certainly one that I don't think can celebrate. You know, it breaks my heart, and I think it breaks our collective heart to feel like we need to be grateful, celebratory, thankful, or feel relief for just the basic acknowledgement that the cruel and complete disregard for human life that took George Floyd's life, that Officer Chauvin showed us to all, that we have to be relieved that for some semblance of justice to occur. You know, obviously justice would be George Floyd still being alive. Justice would be people not having to have to worry, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, not having to have to worry every time that they interact with the police, every time that they walk outside and potentially may have an interaction with the police. And so while I'm grateful for the verdict, and I'm really grateful for his family, and I'm grateful for all of our communities across the country to have this relief, I think we can't accept it as being some sort of end to the question, or even accept the feeling of joy that we felt, because that joy was actually, you know, just the relief of not being further, you know, sort of abused by a system that has cared so little for many of us. And there was a moment of silence and prayerful meditation across the city last night at 7, I believe. Reverend Walden might have held space for some of that. But we wanted to have an opportunity here as the Community Police Commission to open up an opportunity for commissioners to discuss their feelings, their perspectives, their thoughts about the Chauvin verdict, about the death of George Floyd, about the Black Lives Matter uprising that began last year and continues to swell, and hopefully will continue to swell for years to come. And so I, you know, open it to all commissioners. I really hope that our Black commissioners will make their voices heard, and you know, open space for Black commissioners to talk first, but really will open it for whoever is willing to share their thoughts, their ideas of how this has impacted their community, and you know, use this as an opportunity to speak not just to other commissioners, but to the city, our elected officials who are listening, to the SPD officers who are listening, to the people who are monitoring and litigating the consent decree. Sorry, I almost never get emotional, but I am. So I open it up for all of you. I hope that someone's willing to go first.
I'll go. This is Erica. I just want to say that, you know, I'm pleased with the verdict, but but I know being a daughter to a Black man, a sister to a Black man, and a mother to a Black son, I can't give up just yet. We're not out the woods. And so even with the verdict, we still have to wait for the sentencing to make sure it reflects what I would say the people that look like me would have been receiving if we have done something similar. And so for that, I say within the CPC and even within community, we have to continue to think of ways to further the or develop an anti-racist agenda to further the equity and social justice agenda. Black and brown bodies do matter, and it seems like the verdict yesterday, it was right, a step in the right direction. But I just don't want us to get so happy for something that we so deserved. And I just also want to say thank you to Reverend Walden and to LaRon for providing those powerful words of wisdom at yesterday's press conference, and even LaRon for this morning. I think it's emotional for all of us, but we can't give up. And so I look forward to us coming up with equitable policing practices and to really put in the work so that this can stop. When we see things that happen in other jurisdictions, it's on its way. It's here if it hasn't happened already. And I think all of us are aware on the issues Seattle police and our community of colors have had, and the people we have lost at the hands of the police. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Reverend Walden?
Good morning. I thank you for an opportunity to also speak, and I speak of my collective lived experience for 70 plus decades. And so yesterday was a combination of lived experience and seeing a lot of things that happen, and also bringing up Rodney King and what the cameras have done. And the cameras didn't help a conviction with Eric Gardner or Philando or in other cases. But in this case, the camera did. And so it's been 30 years since the Rodney King event last month, and a whole generation. So we've gone a whole generation before we can get police officers absolutely charged with a crime. And so we carry the collective sorrow in our bones and in our spirits and in our system of all our ancestors and all our people who have been harmed in America and continue to be harmed. And then and so our work isn't done, but a collective. But I saw that the graciousness of the family and what they brought to this was tremendous. And you know, I mean, some of us have had lynchings in our family that go back a generation, several generations ago, and with no resolution. And so yesterday was like a collective resolution for African Americans, but it's not. It's a step on the road, and it's a beginning. It's not an ending. And you know, I always think about Charlena. I mean, and I just went for the record. We did talk about her. We did the same thing here for Charlena Louds and for other people. So in some of those cases still have to be adjudicated in the court. But I'm grateful and thank you for this opportunity as a mother and a grandmother who's stayed on this battlefield. Did never take my marbles and go home. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be part of this, and my prayers is for the family and all the community who's still suffering. Thank you for this moment.
Thank you, Reverend Walden. Is there another commissioner that would like to? Suzette Dickerson? Okay.
I'll go ahead and go. I wanted to say thank you for the voices that went before me. And this is a very emotional time for all of us. It's like everybody has said, that it is a step in the right direction, although we have so much work to do. And I'm hoping through legislation and through the work that we're doing that we will get some semblance of restoration of the need for more equity in the way that people are handled within policing, that there needs to be so much training and reform. But I'm just, I'm hopeful with this verdict that went out that this is the step that will transpire into change, and that change will continue as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Suzette.
I just want to add one quick thing, and I also asked for us to think about Micaiah Bryant, the 16-year-old Black teenager that was killed in Ohio yesterday, just hours after the verdict.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, I see that Reverend Hunter has her hand up.
Thank you. My comments are very simple. I think I just felt relief. There was zero joy, but just relief. There's no justice because we can't bring him back. George Floyd won't come back. Neither will all of the others that were murdered by law enforcement. And the fear is still there as we walk outside as people of color and leave our homes. And sometimes the fear is we may even be attacked or killed in our homes. So there's still a lot of work to do, but I was encouraged by the verdict, and it just made me recommit myself to the work that the commission does until there truly is justice for all people of color.
Thank you, Reverend Hunter. Esther?
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I think that I've been just sitting with, gosh, quite frankly, a lot of skepticism and just a lot of heart for his family. I think what's important to remember from an Indigenous perspective is that this particular officer had inflicted violence upon a Native man years before this particular occurrence happened with George Floyd. And this is a pattern of behavior. And most importantly, it's a significant pattern of behavior just in law enforcement. And skepticism because, there's the appeals process. They've already highlighted the challenges of the political implications and kind of the political influence over this verdict. And, I do want to see justice served. And it's sad to me that here we are sitting in 2021, just grateful for once somebody was held accountable. And so for me, it may seem like a pivotal moment and I need to see it through, right? We need to see where the sentencing lands. And it just tells me that we have so much more work to do. And it helps me, remind me of those threads that bind us as, Native people and people of color, just generally. So that's where I am today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Esther. Joseph?
Yeah, and I love the reframe in the space that this is not a celebration, and it's not. And as a Pacific person or Pacific Islander person, I think I'm working on activating my community to make sure that they are not complacent in this movement towards justice, that Black folks have been holding the body of work, right? But we all know that white supremacy, the ways that it manifests, harms all of our communities. Whether it's anti-Asian hate, anti-Native hate, and also recently we had a 16-year-old Pacific Islander boy that was killed by police in Honolulu, SICAP. And so we cannot sit on the sideline. And my kudos is to the Black community that has bear the burden of the work of justice in this country around reforming our police system, and really is how do we undo the violence that we've internalized in all of us, right? The violence that is very entrenched in our society here. And so I am putting in my commitment to you all that is the very work that is in front of me and my community in collaboration with all of our communities.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Are there any other commissioners who wish to share their thoughts, make any statements that they want our elected officials, our police, our community to hear. Okay. I just want to thank you all for the work that you do for the CPC. And I want to thank everyone who's taken the opportunity to share this moment. I'm going to hand it back over to Erin for department updates.
Thank you, Lauren. Up next, we have the department updates, and the first item is the Seattle Police Department Readiness Plan. I believe we have Chief Drennan here with us today.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Assistant Chief Brian Grennan. So my responsibility for the department is really the planning for big events, small events, special events, sporting events. So the chief has asked me to kind of give an update for our preparations for the ongoing events that have occurred. So historically, we've generally had problems on May Day, although last year wasn't much of a challenge. This year, we are planning and to be prepared. We're concerned potentially for the release of the verdict yesterday, and things were amazingly quiet. We had a group of folks that went out and marched, but there was very little property damage. I think we had one arrest. The group was fairly small. So our preparation for May Day and subsequent events, I will tell you that we have studied very hard the reviews from your group, the CPC, from last year, the IG. We're currently involved in the Sentinel review with the IG on protest management, and then also the review from OPA. So we've incorporated those lessons learned into how we manage protests in the future. And I think that there's a large change from what we did in the past. Part of that is to understand that the police at times can become the focal point of the protest. So it was our intent to facilitate the First Amendment rights of anybody that wants to march, but also kind of keep a distance from that, stay out of view, and then if there are isolated acts of property damage or whatever violence, that our intent is to go in, isolate those individuals who are committing those crimes, separate that from the individuals that want to exercise their First Amendment rights, make those target arrests, and then kind of return that protest back or that event back to the expression of their First Amendment rights. And so I think in that respect, that's where we're at. We've changed some of our tactics on how we kind of present ourselves. We are trying to distance ourselves from actually trying to stand on a police line. I think that becomes a flashpoint. We saw that in many of the reviews. And so that is an area where we are trying to prevent from doing in the future. I think our plan is pretty solid, and we will implement those practices later on in the future. So far, things have been very quiet, and that is good for us. We want to do everything we can to facilitate the freedom of expression when people go out and march.
Thank you. Any quick questions for Chief Grennan? Okay, not seeing anything. We will move on to Department of Justice. Do we have an update?
Hi, good morning. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts this morning. It was really good to hear them, and I remain dedicated to doing this work too. I don't have much of an update except to say that have read the questions posed on the methodology document and the monitoring plan, and will be involved in conversations with the monitoring team, I believe, including today, about addressing some of those questions and concerns. So I'll look forward to being a part of that conversation with you guys going forward.
Thank you, Christina. City Council, do we have, we have a long list. I don't see Newell here with us today. Anyone else? Okay. Mayor's office, Dominique?
Good morning. Thank you for having me here this morning. We don't have any major updates at this moment. I think what Chief Diaz gave in terms of what we're getting ready for the various demonstrations, including the life that was taken at the same time. Most of us were standing in a press conference. We are preparing those things. One thing that I think is a direct ask is intentionality of trying to work with community groups to activate spaces, parks, support as we can that are not in Capitol Hill downtown. So in supporting neighborhood parks, if that's Jefferson, if that's Othello, if that's something near your home. So if you know of community organizations that would like support and activation, feel free to give them my email. It's just dominic.stevens@seattle.gov, and we can support on that front. That's the most update I have right now. Thank you.
Sorry, Dominique, just for clarity, when you say activate and support in the parks, do you mean planning for event and demonstrations in neighborhoods as opposed to centralized? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So when we think of activations, we're thinking of spaces that people, if they want to call it a demonstration, or okay, we're thinking of people who want to gather safely, have spaces to express their voice, right? Be in a space that maybe has less SPD presence, right? Has more community presence, right? I know that sometimes some folks were activating, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the LGBTQ community, but a lot of people had outdoor balls and sessions where they could gather and play music and just do the things that did not need to be policed, and that they could use their voice and either express their sorrows or their joys together without having to feel like that's a punishment, if that makes sense. And so that's what we're looking for. I know.
Thank you
People
for
have
that.
cringes on their faces. It's hard to adjust that, vocalizing themselves should not be policed. So yeah, it's hard to adjust that, but it is a thing.
Thank you. Up next is the monitoring team. Do we have an update? Ron? You're muted, Ron.
I cannot really add anything to what Christina has already set forth. We will be comprehensively addressing the questions posed to us by the CPC at your next meeting on May 5th.
Great, sir. And Ron, does that mean that we will receive a written response to our request before that meeting so that we have an opportunity to digest and meaningfully engage with the monitoring team about those issues?
I believe that will be the case. Yes.
And I know, I just want to make clear that we would like to have that response 24 to 48 hours ahead of time and not the morning of or the evening before. We have a lot of commissioners, and our commissioners have many things that they do in their non-CPC life. And so we'd like to make sure that people have a meaningful opportunity to digest the information and be able to come prepared for a discussion. So
absolutely, duly noted.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. OPA update? I'm not. Okay. Jesse, I noticed we have OPA in the attendees section. Do you know if Anthony has an update?
I do not, but Anthony, you can talk.
Hi, no, I'm with OIG. I'm not with OPA.
You're right. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, then we will move to OIG. Any updates from OIG? All right. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Laron Baker to do the co-chair updates.
Great. From the co-chair update, we have two new commissioners who were recently appointed by the City Council, and we are very excited to welcome Lajaya Washington and Catherine Sable. Sorry if I mispronounced either of your names. We are almost now fully staffed as the commission. I think we have one more open spot. And so we are very excited to be have almost all of our legs. And so I'd like to have give an opportunity for Catherine and Lajaya to say any words that they want to say about themselves, about why they are serving on the commission. And I can call on you in order, or you can volunteer yourself, whichever way you want to do this.
I believe only Catherine is here today. We
Oh,
got
sorry.
turned around pretty quickly because they were only confirmed Monday. So we'll
Great.
have Ms. Washington at our next meeting.
I appreciate that. Catherine?
Hello and good morning. It's really wonderful, and I feel so honored to be here with you all and to hear from you all. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to this work and getting to know each of you. Currently, I serve as NAMI Washington's Director of Public Policy and Advocacy. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So I have the great honor to hear from folks all across our state and all across Seattle on their experiences and stories with behavioral health, and particularly at the intersection of behavioral health and policing. So I think that's one of the lens and focuses I hope to bring to this group, and certainly one of my passions. I think it's also really important to acknowledge my whiteness and the unearned privilege that my perspective brings to this table. So I think part of being on this group and in this work is acknowledging that perspective and working to undo white supremacy and supporting other white people, and undoing these really harmful systems that contribute to the disproportional harm and impact on policing. So I really am thankful to be here, and I thank you all for each of your work, and I'm looking forward to learning more and getting more involved. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. And we will turn this over now to our new Executive Director, Brandy Grant.
All right, good morning, everybody, again. Thank you. I just have a couple updates, and one of the main ones is the Seattle Community Police Commission just released our police accountability recommendation tracker this morning. It'll be the first time we've given community members unprecedented centralized access to more than 275 recommendations made by Seattle's civilian-led police accountability agencies. I'm really proud that one of my first acts as the ED of the CPC is to launch this recommendation tracker. The CPC is strongly committed to making sure that we increase transparency around policing and police accountability, and this is just the first step in that process. For our city's efforts to really reimagine policing to succeed, we have to center the voices of the people that are the most impacted by policing. And so this recommendation tracker will show SPD and city leaders what we need to be able to do a better job in centering community in this process. There will be continued large-scale inaction on police accountability recommendations put forth by the CPC and others only serves really to further undermine community trust in the Seattle Police Department and Seattle's entire police accountability system. I want to share with you all just a few stats and the reason why this is so important that we're launching this today, so folks have an opportunity to be able to interface with it. The CPC, OIG, and OPA have made over 181 recommendations combined. SPD has concurred with 120 of those recommendations, which is about 66%. Only 61 of those combined recommendations have been fully implemented or reported as implemented at 34%. The CPC specifically has made 44 recommendations to SPD, and SPD has concurred with just 15 of the CPC's recommendations, again at 34%. Only 5 of those have been fully implemented or reported as implemented at 11%. We launched this morning on YouTube as well on our CPC channel an opportunity for you all to be able to interface with the tutorial that will show community members as well as commissioners how you can interface with this recommendation tracker and see the ease of being able to use it and all of the documents and resources that are provided. This has been long-term work. This has been efforts that has included all accountability partners. Everyone has been able to provide their input, their suggestions. It has been showed in testing and feedback to community members through our community engagement work group. We are still taking suggestions and feedback. This will be a platform that will be forever interchangeable. And so there are still opportunities for folks to be able to engage with it and be able to provide feedback to us. I will send around the link to you all. I'll have Jesse actually send around the link to you all for the YouTube tutorial for you to be able to see how easy it is to navigate and be able to go through the recommendation tracker on your own. Please do not hesitate to send us any feedback or any other additional recommendations around the recommendation tracker. We're really excited to launch this today. The commission should be proud of the work that went into making sure that this happened, and to give us one step closer to making sure that we're holding accountability partners accountable, in all honesty, and being able to be a little bit more transparent to community. So that is my main update this morning. And if there are any questions that anybody has or any comments they'd like to make, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Well, like you said, a long time coming. And so there's no better moment than now. So thank you. Now it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much for the update. New CPC business. We were asked at the last meeting to add this to the agenda. Is there, I believe Suzette has raised an interest into going into executive session, so that would be a new business item. So we have addressed that and we will add that to the end of this meeting. Are there any other new items?
See Reverend Hunter raised her hand.
Thank you. As a Baptist pastor in Seattle and a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I was pretty alarmed when I read in the paper last weekend that the wellness unit of SPD sent an invitation to SPD employees, inviting them to a dinner that was going to be hosted by Franklin Graham. And those of us in the religious world and LGBTQ plus world know that Franklin Graham is anti-LGBT and against marriage equality. And I'm grateful that Chief Diaz rescinded the invitation. But I just want to know what steps are taken to vet invitations like that. And what steps are being taken so that the wellness unit personnel are more knowledgeable about homophobic, transphobic, and racist organizations that approach them. And so I just like some information about that.
And you raised a really great question, Reverend Hunter. I think many of us were flat-footed by that announcement. And what we can do is we can send a request for information to SPD and hopefully be able to provide some reporting back at our next meeting on that issue.
Thank you.
Joseph, I see your hand up. I can't tell if that is from earlier or now.
It's from earlier.
Okay, thank you.
I need a Zoom tutorial, y'all.
All right, Austin, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you to everybody who spoke earlier. That was very moving, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I'm curious about the status of SPD's investigations and steps taken into the officers who attended the Capitol riot. I haven't heard anything about that since a March 10th article in the Seattle Times about the legal proceedings around releasing those names, but I know that there are internal investigations ongoing, and I am curious about the progress of those.
So we had a meeting, and I realize that OP is not here to answer for himself, but the last I heard last week is that they are still about 60 days out on that investigation, but that it is ongoing. It involves several jurisdictions because this happened outside of Seattle. But the update is that work is undergoing, and we can make sure for a future meeting to have OPA, at least come and tell us that process and what they expect to have those released.
Okay, do any other commissioners have new items that they want to raise? It looks like Douglas.
I just think it would be helpful to get report. I know they're not here today, but maybe at a future meeting to get kind of a more like a thorough report or on the OPA report that just came out, kind of talking about 2020 trends of use of force and investigations. By the numbers, use of force just went up dramatically in 2020. And I think it's important that we are fully briefed in that and those numbers and kind of what that means for our work. It kind of seems like we've taken a step back in terms of the use of force by SPD in the city.
Thank you for that, Douglas. And I presume that you mean OPA's annual report. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we will ask OPA to provide a more substantive update around that issue at our next meeting with their update. So thank you. Any other new items? Okay. So our next agenda item is to announce that the CPC is changing legal counsel in the consent decree litigation. The CPC has historically been represented by Perkins Coie, David Perez being the partner at Perkins that took on the representation, and most recently he was assisted by Anna Thompson. And we greatly appreciate Perkins, David, and Anna's work representing us in such an important matter, making sure that the voice of the community is heard before Judge Robert in the consent decree litigation. And we really want to thank them for the dedication and years of hard work that they have put in. We are moving counsel now to the law firm of Sussman and Godfrey. It's a time for sort of a new change in leadership with the CPC and new energy, and a very different time in the consent decree litigation. And so it seemed to line up to bring on a new legal team. And we are just so incredibly excited and grateful that the law firm Sussman Godfrey is ready and willing to step forward to provide legal representation for us and ensure that the CPC's voice is heard in the consent decree litigation. And here to talk about, introduce themselves, are Dan Shee and Edgar Sargent, who are the two partners who will be leading the charge. And so I will turn it over to them to let them introduce themselves and give a little bit more information.
Hey, thank you, LaRonde. Yeah, my name is Edgar Sargent, and we look at our role representing the CPC as counsel, as advisory. I want to make it clear that I don't expect, and I don't, none of my partners who are working on this litigation expect to be contributing substantively to these meetings. We're here to listen and to take guidance from you as to the positions that you would like the CPC to take in the litigation before Judge Robart. It's a complex case. There are almost 900 filings over the past 5 or 6 years. Dan and I are just in the process now of getting up to speed about the current status of that litigation and what we think is likely to happen going forward. As we get our feet in that process, I expect that we will be coming and providing reports and updates to the committee. I don't, beyond that, and if anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. I just wanted to say thank you very much. We're honored, and the firm as a whole is honored. This has been a big deal within my firm to be asked to take on this representation, and I'm hoping to really be able to contribute and help you all move this process forward.
And I'll just say hi too. I don't have anything to add beyond what Edgar said, but just very pleased to be helping with this matter and look forward to working with you all.
Great, thank you both so much. And for the commission, at our next meeting, we will have an executive session where we will have a privileged conversation with our new legal counsel, Edgar and Dan, for them to give us an update and to think about sort of what we may need to do in the matter moving forward. But we are really excited to bring them on board. So thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Erin for our next agenda item.
Well, thank you. And I believe we have a number of work group updates. Brandy, do you want to kick those off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. I just wanted to do an introduction and have us go over some of the work groups that we're trying to get re-engaged that we had done previously in the past, and then also give some updates about the current work groups that we currently have going. And as many of you know, with last year when the protests increased in full force due to the events of last summer, we had initiated a demonstration management work group that we had temporarily for some time, and we are, based on everything that is currently going on and the fact that, we're still fighting for a lot of what we were before. We wanted to continue to make sure that there was a presence around police practices with an initial focus around demonstration management. And so, we want to make sure that when officers are showing up to protests and demonstrations, that talk about the impact of where those activities can either go from being peaceful to escalating unnecessarily. And so this work group will be a way for the CPC to keep a real pulse on issues that may arise out of how SPD responds to protests and demonstrations and what that impact is to community police relations. I'm going to have Shailene go into some of the real specifics around like our project start dates, how often we would like to meet. And then commissioners that were tapped before that worked primarily with this group, we're hoping that you will resume, but then we're also wanting to open the floor to the full commission and see if there are opportunities for other folks to participate in some work groups that you haven't had an opportunity to participate in before, especially with us having so many new commissioners as well too. So we want to open that up. I'm going to pass it over to Shailene, and she's going to go into some of the specifics about what this work group proposal can look like. And then we just would like to hear from folks about if you're interested in them, okay? Shailene?
Thanks, Brandy. Good morning, everyone. So I want to talk through two of the upcoming work groups that Brandy was mentioning, and I'll kind of piggyback off of the one she mentioned before, which is our police practices work group. So the initial focus that was mentioned is demonstration management. Logistically, this work group is going to have an initial pre-prep, if you want to call it that way, meeting tomorrow. And this will help to kind of create, kind of formalize the process of what that will look like. But as Brandy talked about, there's two focuses for that work group. And it's one, to look at the way in which SPD shows up into these spaces, the way in which they engage with the community, and gives you an opportunity to help continue that policy process as they continue to look at their crowd control management on the ways they can partner with community to ensure that people are able to exercise their First Amendment rights in a safe manner while also not being antagonized by SPD. So that is one of the primary focuses of the work group. The second part of this work group that will also combine with the other work group I will talk about is also looking at complaints that have stemmed out of demonstrations, primarily from our last season of demonstrations, but as we move into the season, especially with May coming up, rapidly approaching. So there'll be two ways in which you will engage in this work. So our projected start date would actually be next week or the week after, with the initial planning meeting happening tomorrow. And there were some invitations that were sent initially, but again, as Edie Grant has mentioned, if you want to join this work group, please let us know. As work groups go, they're always staffed by commissioners, but they're supported by staff. So I am usually there. Nia Franco, who's our senior policy advisor, who's also tasked in her position primarily to drive the work behind the scenes. Groups will also be present. Edie Grant is also usually present at these, and other staff members. So you're supported in that work on the back end, while also being able to drive that work collectively and together. This work group will be.
Can I just stop you for just a second?
Oh, I'm sorry, Erin, please go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I just want to make sure that, especially for our new commissioners, that, you know, it might feel like we're throwing a lot at you all of a sudden. But as we discussed during all of the, you know, interview process, it is expected that all commissioners serve on at least one committee. And that is something that we want to hear from you, but ultimately, the co-chairs are the ones who create these committees, and we're going to place you, but we'd like to make sure that we get input from each commissioner. So if you're hearing something and it seems like it's coming fast, we'd be happy to answer questions. But we want to make sure that we have full commissioner involvement on each of these committees, but we also would love to hear where you would like to be. So as you're listening to Shailene, you know, think about, you know, the other committees and where you might want to be placed. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Erin. I appreciate that. And if I'm talking too fast also, just do this, I'll slow down. But you'll also receive the proposal document that was kind of created that gives you a breakdown. You receive that in an email, but you also receive the document itself. And then you will have access to us to kind of ask logistical questions or anything you might need. So that, is the first work group that's coming, and that's the police practices work group, and the initial focus is demonstration management. So the second one that I'd like to talk about is a complainant appeals process. So this is required by ordinance, and there's also a financial component that we have allotted to us to support this work group. And so this would be the foundation to developing a process for victims of police misconduct to seek tangible justice. So that's why this is important. That is the whole point of this work group. This is projected to start probably the week of May 31st or sometime within the month of May. We don't want to launch these too close to one another. And so we will send out emails also to everyone for reminders, and then also you can contact us if it's something that you're interested in. Meeting frequency, again, that first meeting of any work group will be your pre-planning initial meeting where you will craft as commissioners and solidify those objectives of what you want to do, potential projects. So what I'm saying here is essentially a proposal that you can all craft and make your own. Potential projects that would come out of this work group would be determining the need for a complainant appeals process, what that process should entail, and who should be involved. And of course, with any work group, you can also, there's an opportunity to invite the community into these work groups as well. So that pre-planning meeting that we will have will be really important for you all to be a part of that, because you'll form this. We also identified a few commissioners that we think would be really helpful on this, but like Edie Grant has said, and like Co-Chair Goodman has said, if this is something that interests you, please let us know. So that's the two work groups that are rapidly approaching or that we're coming up close to. So please let us know. You will receive this information in detail of the proposed objectives for these and potential projects and meeting and start dates, at least for the initial or the week that we are projecting.
We have one other work group that we do need to make sure that folks are aware of, and we'll definitely need people to be part of, and that is the strategic planning working group. As you know, at our last meeting, we had the consultants here to, you know, talk about this process. And while the entire commission will be involved in this work, it is really important that we have, you know, a good working group to inform this process as well. And I want to be really clear that this is completely appropriate and available for new commissioners to be involved in. The commission is, you know, looking at the work, and it's important to have, you know, the wide range of views, including people who know how we've always done it and people who can help us see other ways to do it as well. So that first meeting is Monday, and I don't have my calendar up in front of me, but I believe it's at 10 a.m. Is that correct, Brandy?
It's from 10 to 12, yes.
Thank you. So that is a really important one to also remember. So in addition, and sorry, Charlene, we also, have our standing work group of community engagement. So, the fact that these work groups are coming on fresh is also an opportunity for folks that are coming onto the commission to be involved. These groups are not, set in stone in a way. So it's really open for people that are joining the commission to get involved, to share their expertise, experience, knowledge. And so, we're hoping folks can join for those first initial sessions, because that will set the schedule for moving forward. So, I don't know if people want to do a raise the hand, if people want to email, if Lauren and I need to just call everybody and say, hey, what committees are you interested in? But this is the point where we start to divide up the work amongst all of, the eager hands on this commission.
And I'm going to suggest, I know that Erin and I have check-ins with new commissioners coming up. So I think it might be a good opportunity for Erin and I to just actually call each of the commissioners and talk to you individually in a less public space about what your interests are. And then we'll assign you from there. So you can, you will hear from us within, I would say, the next week, but I'm hoping that we can maybe clear some space on our calendars between now and Monday. I'm saying that as out of the blue, Erin, but in the next week, we will reach out to all of the commissioners and have a conversation with you.
Thank you. I thought Cindy.
Great.
I'm sorry. There's only 2 more work groups. I'm going to turn it over to the leads of those work groups that are currently active. And that way commissioners can hear the ones that are currently, as the co-chairs mentioned, that are up and running. That is state legislative agenda, which is actually kind of winding down because session is almost over. And it is a standing work group that pops up every single year when session is about to start and last through legislative session. And also our community engagement committee work group, which actually met last night, meets monthly, and that is also a standing committee meeting as well. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Nia to talk about state legislative agenda, give an update, and then I'll turn it over to Joseph Saya and Alina Santian to talk about Community Engagement Committee, and they are the commissioner leads for that work group. Nia, would you mind kicking us off for SLA?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the SLA work group, what we mainly focus on is at close to the end of the year, we'll start putting together the CPC's legislative priorities in preparation for the legislative session that normally kicks off at the beginning of the following year. During the legislative session, prior to when it starts, we will have conversations with people like the ACLU to kind of figure out what some of the priorities are going to be moving forward and what kind of bills we would be interested in supporting. The CPC will vote, and from there we will either have commissioners deliver testimony or submit written statements in support of the legislation that you all vote to support. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the bills that are currently still active in the session. So initially, when we started out, there were 9 bills that the commission voted to support. Of those 9 bills, 5 have made it through to the final stages, which is really exciting. It's been a really exciting year for police reform in terms of legislation. So I'll go over some of those bills now. The first is Senate Bill 5051, and this is the state oversight and accountability legislation. Earlier in this year, we had retired Judge Levinson come in and speak to this bill. So essentially what this does is it's about the certification and decertification of officers when they've committed like egregious misconduct. And this bill also expanded the requirements of who is on the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. Some of the opposition that this bill faced was that there were some concerns from law enforcement about the number of civilians on the commission. The legislation sought to expand the number of civilians present in that commission. So what we did in support is we had Commissioner Douglas Wagner give testimony in both the House and the Senate in support of this legislation. And we also signed on to a letter that was driven by multiple city agencies, including the mayor's office, to really push this legislation over the finish line. At this point, it has passed both chambers. So the next step would be for this legislation to be signed by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. Then it will be sent to the governor. Then the governor will hopefully sign it. And at that point, it will become, they'll pick an effective date, normally 90 days after the end of session. The second bill that we have that's still going is Senate Bill 5259, and this is a use of force data collection bill. Initially, when we heard this bill, we heard from the AGO's office, and they had essentially picked Washington State University to be the collector, and they would collect the data, analyze it, and publish it publicly. But that there was some opposition to having already selected the entity. So what ended up happening with this bill is that it's requiring the AGO's office to go through like a procurement process to figure out who will collect the information. But the information that they're looking to collect is still the same: use of force, everything about the incident, including the officer and the victim. And they're still wanting to have this publicly published and available. So what we did is we submitted statements in support of the legislation. At this point in session, it has been signed by both the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. So the next steps will be for it to be sent to the governor, hopefully get a signature there, and then it will be, they will have to start that process of finding an institution to collect and synthesize and publish all of this data. The next bill is House Bill 1054, which establishes some requirements for tactics and equipment used by police officers. Some of the highlights is that this bill prohibits the use of chokeholds and neck restraints statewide. It establishes guidelines for when a law enforcement organization can use tear gas, and requires the Criminal Justice Training Commission to convene a work group and develop a model policy for training in the use of canine teams, and prohibits courts from issuing a search warrant that grants an exception to the requirement to provide notice. So no-knock warrants would be out. Initially, this legislation included a full ban on tear gas, but some of the opposition to that was there were some law enforcement agencies that made arguments for tear gas to be used in certain situations. So they ended up backing away from a full statewide ban. So what we did in support of this legislation is we had Commissioner Alina Santillan deliver testimony in the Senate in support of this legislation. Right now, this piece of legislation is going through a reconciliation process. So some of the changes, including the tear gas ban, happened once it transferred chambers. So there needs to be a reconciliation process because the initiating chamber, which was the House, did not like some of the amendments and changes that were made when it went through the Senate. So if the reconciliation process goes well, then the next steps will be signatures from the Senate President and Speaker, and that legislation being delivered to the governor and the governor signing. The next piece of legislation is House Bill 1310, and it concerns permissible uses of force by law enforcement and establishes a standard for physical force by police officers. Some of the changes in this bill is that it now requires the Attorney General to develop a model policy on law enforcement's use of force and de-escalation tactics. That would essentially have to be either incorporated or somehow added into whatever current policies jurisdictions currently have. So in support of this, we submitted statements in support, and also we had Commissioner Douglas Wagner deliver testimony in the Senate in support of the legislation. Right now, it is also going through that reconciliation process, and if that goes well, it will take the same course as House Bill 1054, which is that it will require the signatures, and it'll be delivered to the governor will sign, and then it'll become effective. The last bill that we fully voted to support that is still active is Senate Bill 5263, and this is what's been called the Felony Bar Bill. It essentially requires now that in order to use the felony bar defense, it must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the person who was injured or killed by a police officer was actually engaged in the commission of a felony at the time that they were injured or killed. The previous standard was just a preponderance of evidence standard. So this like raises the bar for actually being able to use that defense. So we submitted written statements in support of the legislation in both the House and the Senate. This legislation has already been delivered to the governor. So the next step will be a signature and determining an effective date. In addition to these 5 pieces of legislation that are still moving, there were 2 more that we kept an eye on because they aligned with our legislative agenda that we developed. So the first is Senate Bill 5066, which is a duty to intervene legislation, which essentially requires officers to intervene if they see a fellow officer committing misconduct, and also requires them to report the misconduct to that officer's supervisor. This falls in line with a lot of agencies were looking to include some sort of duty to intervene into their requirements, but now this makes it something that is required by the state. There was not a lot of opposition to this legislation, which I thought was interesting, but good, interesting in a good way. So we submitted a written statement in the Senate, and we had Reverend Williams give a statement in support when the legislation was in the House. Currently, this has passed both chambers, so the next step would be to get the signatures from the Senate President and the House Speaker, and then it will be delivered to the governor, signed by the governor, and then determine an effective date. The final piece is Senate Bill 5051, and this was about developing a list of state arbitrators that can be called upon to hear discipline-related grievances. So what we did in support of this was we had Commissioner Colleen Echohawk deliver testimony in support of the legislation while highlighting that our support was there, but we would prefer to see a full removal of arbitration because that is what aligned with our legislative agenda. So right now, this bill has already been signed by the governor and it has an effective date of July 25th, 2021. So those are all the bills that we were keeping an eye on or we voted to support that are still currently moving and are getting to those final stages. If you all have any questions about any of the bills that I've gone over, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Nia, so much. That was incredible as usual. Everyone, please keep in mind, this is a standing committee, and once session has wrapped, we will do an overview of the legislative session, and then this work group will start back up probably around September in preparation to send our legislative priorities to the city and then prep for legislative session. So keep that in mind as you're signing up to work groups. Last work group that we will turn to, I will hand it over to Alina Santillan and Joseph Saya, who are the leads of our Community Engagement Committee work group, to talk about the objective of this committee and give a little bit of an update of our meeting last night.
Thanks, Shailene. Excuse my sunshine sitting out here in my tank top. It's too nice to be inside. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about the group. Last night we met and really just held space for community folks to share kind of how they were feeling and really tried to create space for people to share. I think that, you know, historically the CPC, we can just do better in community engagement and making sure that community knows what the CPC is, that we're doing our due diligence and being able to reach out to folks and build what this committee looks like. We talked about some CPC updates and events. We talked about the Sentinel Review panel. I sit on that panel as a commissioner. And how that is going, that process and wrapping up. I think our hope for the Community Engagement Committee is that we have more community engagement. I don't know if Dominique is still on the call, but I would love to connect with you about ways in which we can build power with collective communities and create spaces like you were talking about. I think that that's something that the community engagement should be a part of, but looking for more commissioners to be engaged in this work. We really want to be able to expand this process and have more engagement on that front. Joseph, I'll let you speak to anything you want to add on there also.
Yeah, thanks, Alina. And I think the only addition that we have is we just want to have a level space for community to access so that we hear more of community voices at the table. I think what I'm noticing is there's a strong emphasis in engaging with our young people, young organizers in our communities, and that's a high value, at least with me and Alina and the CPC staff. And so, you know, Lejeya has been involved, and we have other young folks that show up to that space. And so if you have young people that would like to get involved, let them know. We are second Tuesdays at 6 p.m. It's a pretty awesome space. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that complete work group updates? Any other questions from commissioners on that section? Okay, now we will need to go into executive session. This, for purposes just reviewing the bylaws, executive session is just commissioners and the executive director. Jesse, are you able to do a breakout session from this format?
I do not believe that I am, but I'm going to try to find a fix.
Okay, thank you.
And Aaron, this is Gary Smith. Just to be clear, you should announce the purpose of the executive session, which I understand is to discuss a complaint and/or the performance of a public official or employee and the expected time of the executive session.
Yes, let's first figure out if we can, how we're going to technologically do this, and then I'll set the time based on that, because we do these Zoom meetings in a webinar format, not a meeting format. And so that is another reason why it's helpful to know ahead of time. But I have faith that Jesse is going to be able to figure out a fix for us.
Thank you for stalling for me. I think I have an idea. I think what we'll need to do is to remove everyone from the meeting that will not be an executive session, and then have them rejoin at the specified time that executive session ends.
Yes, because you can rejoin and stay in the waiting. Do we have a waiting room for this?
We don't have a waiting room, so they just have to rejoin at the time, and I'd have to remove them if I see them come back in.
Okay, so it is 10:28. It'll probably take us a couple of minutes to function. So I am going to call an executive session from 10:30 to 10:50. And at that point, we will come back into live session. For all of you attendees and others, please take a moment now to log out, and we will welcome you back at 10:50.